And as always, we're going to begin with a little bit of breath work. So just notice where you are in this experience. Just pay attention to, how you're showing up this morning. Sometimes we are more vibrant than others. Sometimes we have more to give. Sometimes we need to take more, right? Sometimes we need more. We need to receive more. Just notice which space you're in now. If you're more in the receiving space or in the more giving space. They can both work in your favor. Feel free to take anything you need to be nurtured with. And if you need to give, maybe consider giving yourself something this morning, offering yourself something rather than extending outside of yourself. So with that, we'll just drop the shoulders, make sure you're comfortable. Just notice if there's any tension between the neck and shoulders. And we're going to begin with that first inhale, the first round of inhale, just introducing ourselves to ourselves this morning, inhaling through the nose, really bringing that breath into the body, into the belly, into the chest area, and into the abdomen, filling that space, introducing yourself to this part of your consciousness this morning, and exhaling when you're ready, blowing through your mouth, just slow and steady, tightening the core, releasing anything that might not be serving you now. And just notice on the next inhale, placing the tongue at the roof of the mouth, softening that tongue. So just even notice that even in the tongue or the jawline in itself, if there's tension, notice where you need to slow down. So softening those areas. If you're finding that your jaw is a little tight, feel free to just massage it. You can kind of just run your thumb along the line of your jaw. Inhale. And slowly begin to exhale. Beautiful. And the next one, as you inhale again, just notice if there's any specific belief that you woke up with this morning. Like, I believe I can get through the day. I believe I can accomplish, I can achieve. Or I don't believe, right? Like sometimes we get up and we're like, oh, today's a bad day, So just notice where your starting point is today. Just notice where that starting point is. Sometimes noticing where that starting point is can really help us. And inhale from there, just notice where that goes, where your body goes, where your mind goes. I believe I can. I believe I can't. Where are you? Exhale here. Release. And notice if you can just let that go for a moment. So letting that belief go for a moment. I'm going to take one more round here, inhaling through the nose. And take in whatever it is that you need, and exhaling. Through the mouth. Beautiful. So as you enter today, just notice like where your engine begins. So we've built on the past like the concept of frequency in general. Like when we're in the creation space, we are more open to critique. And then when we're in the more receiving state, we're in a lower vibration and we're open to receiving, but we're more sensitive, right? Because it's more of a sensory experience. So it's much more of a more gentle approach. So if we're finding that we're in a space where it is difficult for us to receive, it's really important to notice if there is tension in the body, right? It is really important to notice if there's something that is stopping you from kind of going into the pleasures of life, like the more it's like the concept of the week and Shabbos, right? So for some of us, Shabbos is a really great time, and for some of us, Shabbos could be a really challenging time. And the question is why, right? So on a ground level, it would be like during the week is like critique, right? Create. And then Shabbos would be the place where we would be able to kind of go into that more vulnerable state, more vulnerable frequency, and receive. And the question is, when we're not in those spaces, what is the reason, right? So we're going to tap into a little bit of that today. And just notice where you are in this journey. Like for every single one of us, even in our own lives, there are times where we're more creative and we're creating, and the more receiving. And it's very interesting to see. Sometimes it could be weeks at a time. Like we have this in different increments, right? Just like with a cycle. And we have this in a day. Sometimes in the day we are more creative. And sometimes during the day we are less creative and more, even we can call it lazy, right? For some of us, we have that misconception that, we might be lazy. But we're in that space where we're in that lower vibration, we're more sensitive, we have the ability to take something in. So you can have this on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a yearly basis. I've had it where some years I've been more productive than others. I met this woman once, she's from Women, and she works with this energy kind of space, and she's more in the holistic world. And it was interesting because I was going into my early 30s, and she said to me, she goes, for where you are in your cycle of just life, and who you are as a person, this next year would be a really good time for you to start learning something. As in, if there was ever a time for you to learn something, it's now. As in, you're in a position where you are more receptive and things are aligned. And it was very interesting because she actually was very accurate. It was very on point, and it was the beginning of this deep dive into this journey that I am in right now. But I noticed that some years or some months, I just didn't have the same drive or conviction that I always had, right? So it's interesting to notice the timing, right? So part of it is also the siyata dishmaya. Like a lot of, I noticed with certain things where I was in a space where I really wanted to, let's say, be in the creative space, but Hashem just didn't want that for me at the moment. And it ended up, when I looked back, I was like, well, if I was going to be that busy in my head, I wouldn't have been able to appreciate or enjoy the time where things were like, let's say it was like simchas or something. If I was in a creative space, I wouldn't be able to be in that lower frequency where I was able to take it in and be more in that sensory space. So it's just interesting to kind of notice in that space, like what it is that you believe, right? Because this is what we're going to go into next, is what are your beliefs about yourself, right? Who do you think you are? This concept of like self-concept is the thing that is going to determine how you move sometimes. So there are layers, right? So there's that creation, and then there's the receiving, right? So we get that whole bit now. Now we're going to go into getting that engine started. So I've had this a few times in my life, And I actually experienced it this week again, which was a really fascinating experience, where in my life, so I felt like that part of me, there was a piece of me that just started doubting things, and I wasn't able to. At first, I didn't realize that I was doubting myself. I just found myself struggling with making decisions, right? With decision making, and it was like a whole week of struggling with decision making, besides for other things that piled up on top of it. And then I had to stop, and I took that time to meditate and journal and restructure. Like, I used all the tools that I have to really sit down. And because I was like, okay, this is not just a day. This is like something shifted in my process. Because if it was just like a bad day, by the next day I would be in the next space and I would be able to kind of just continue navigating. But I found it's like one decision after the next that felt like this massive weight on my shoulders. And so I sat with it for a moment. And what was interesting was, there was a time in my life where this did happen to me, and it was kind of this lull in productivity. So this week I experienced it again. And yesterday I mean, obviously when we have to show up for life, right, we don't sometimes have the luxury of allocating enough time, right? Because to like solve this kind of thing, sometimes you need a good few hours without any external interruption, right? Or any obligation or responsibility, which is difficult as a woman because we have to show up and people need us, and there's work and life and all the things. So I kind of boxed myself in, and I was like, okay, I have to figure this out because something's off here. And it was fascinating because there was something there. Whereas I made a decision, there was a decision that I made that ended up not panning out, right? So like in life in general, like you'll have like a business decision, or it's like like we go back to the baking a cake. Sometimes that cake flops. But one thing that I learned, actually, this is a piece of advice that my mother gave me for business. She said, you have to put away money for trial and error. Like there has to be that room, that elasticity for trying something, because not always when you do something does it work the first time. And I'm in a new space when it comes to certain things. And there was a situation where it was new to me, and I wasn't sure the approach, and I all of a sudden doubted myself. And what ended up happening was it became a domino effect of, oh no, can I not trust my decision making, right? But the thing was that I didn't see that part. I didn't see this piece of me not being able to make decisions. I just found myself in a position where I wasn't able to make decisions when it came to simple things for a few days. And I was like, uh-oh, something happened here. What happened? So I sat down with myself and I realized that there was a certain component, right? We all have a self-belief of a self-concept, right? There is something that makes us go, right? There's something in our life that helps us navigate who we are. And it begins with like this self-mastery of sorts, right? And when we are in a place where there's a lack of self-belief, it prevents us as the individual from taking control of our own transformation. Right? What ends up happening is we start depending on other people to make these decisions for us. And we don't show up, and then things start lagging, right? So what I realized was that there was a certain component, right, in my trust. There is a certain cornerstone, right? It's like the battery that I needed that helps the entire engine run. And I shared it with the people in my life, where I was like, in my life, and I feel like especially in life in general right now, the way society is run, for most of us, our whole day runs on the confidence we have in our decision making. And if we don't have the confidence in decision making, right, we start getting stuck. We really, really start getting stuck. So it's asking yourself, where do you get your confidence in your decision making? Because it's the decision. How do I approach even what I'm going to eat, who I'm going to interact with, what I'm going to say, what am I going to do for myself, right? What am I going to do for others? How I'm going to build, right? It's what am I going to say yes to? What am I going to say no to? So it's asking yourself where you get that confidence. What is that peace? What is that confidence? Where's that battery? It's the self-mastery piece. So it's a really important question to ask yourself. So it's taking a time to kind of pedal back into your life, into a moment where you find yourself doubting yourself, and kind of reversing that domino effect and trying to notice where did that first domino fall, right? And when I was younger, I used to think, oh, I was just stupid and young and just arrogant and confident. But it wasn't true. There was a piece of me that was connected from an intuitive component that helped me with those decisions. And I could see that it's like success built on top of success. Now, not every decision you're going to make is going to succeed, but there's a consistency that builds, and like a momentum of sorts that ends up fortifying all the pieces for it all to flow, right? So even if it's your relationships, and then your responsibilities, right? And then your work, and then your health, and then your self-care. I find that a lot of people, and this is like the punchline of this thing, is that a lot of people, when they struggle with self-care, it's because they struggle a lot of time with their decision making, right? They're not sure how all these pieces work together. And part of it is that lack of the consistency, because they're so much of what they do is stimulated externally, right? But it all really starts from this place of not being sure about who we are. And in Nourish to Flourish, in the time boxing I shared, when we're using the blueprint to build our schedule, right? I have that line there where it's either your schedule is going to, like, if you don't run your schedule is going to run you. And if we don't know where certain things come from, we will be in a place where we will find that ourselves being stagnant, and we'll think, oh, I need inspiration. It's not about needing inspiration, because on those days that we struggle to make decisions, it's the same kind of struggle of like even getting out of bed, right? Because we're unsure where we're going. And if we're unsure where we're going, and this is interesting to see for ourselves and for even the people in our lives. Sorry, just give me a second here. An ad here. If you want gift reactions like these. Even for the people in our lives, like sometimes there are these little things that can give you a lot of insight into some of these components. So as you move through your day and your week, there are really great questions that you can ask yourself. I'm just going to pull it up now. 1 second. So yes, so basically you become what you believe, right? So just noticing what that is, and when you're in a space, notice when you're in a good space what you think your strengths are. Like sometimes we're not sure, we just do something and we're not sure why. So start paying attention to like how you navigate, where you navigate. And a lot of this is going to be in the newsletter. So I have all the questions in the newsletter. Another thing is, how do you talk to yourself when no one else is listening, right? So like, what are the stories that you create? So like sometimes there's these like underlying beliefs of I can or I can't, right? Or I'm not able to, or in this situation, this is not available to me. Notice what those things are. I'm not smart enough, or notice where that is. And sometimes you're able to trace it back to something specific. And the way we trace these things back is by really sitting, clearing that space, sometimes by taking an hour or two of complete quiet and isolation, right? Sitting with that trapped emotion, sitting with that thing you're really struggling with and saying, I'm going to handle this, right? So I always say, yes, therapy and support is a very, very important thing. But what's also important while doing all those other things is to take some time to try to solve your own problems. So somebody came to me the other day saying that their sister, which is somebody that's a lot older than she is, so I would say mid-40s, it's getting really annoying with her complaining, right? She just keeps, this woman just keeps complaining. Everything becomes about a complaint, to the point that she even goes, to the doctor and starts negotiating with and complaining, in the sense of, rather than taking accountability, where the doctor will say do X, Y, and Z, and she will complain that that's not going to work. When if you're going to a professional, sometimes, right, they will give you some good advice. So, but when we get into these bad habits of complaining, then it kind of just spirals. So she said, yeah, she just goes from professional to professional, and she just complains that her life is just what it is. And I said something really interesting to her, which I've used in different places in my life, which I've shared here a few times, where I got from Stephen King. Stephen King is a novel writer. And what he says is that when you're writing a good story, when you're in the middle of a project, right? So he has a book on writing. So because he wrote all these books, he wrote a book on writing. So I have that book, and it's a really great book. And he says, when you're in the process of writing a good story and you run into a situation where you're not sure what happens next, right? If you are going to go share that struggle with somebody else, like try to get it off your chest, what ends up happening is once you get it off your chest, whatever is going to be on paper next is not going to be as good as if you let it fester inside of you a little bit and try to solve the problem on your own. So he says it's similar to people that will say, and he says, never tell somebody you're writing a book, right? Unless it's actually done. Because as soon as, a lot of times in life, the second we say something, if it's positive or negative, so we'll just talk for positive for right now, right? It's like people that kind of talk about being on a new diet. They'll be like, I'm on a new diet, I just started a new diet, or I just went to the gym for the first time, whatever it is. The second you communicate those words, there's less conviction in yourself to do it, because you've already got the recognition and the attention for it, or the acknowledgement, and then you don't have enough motivation to actually go out and continue that journey. And that's why a lot of these things fail. And a lot of times you'll hear people say something and they won't finish it, right? So they'll say, I'm doing this, and it doesn't end, and they don't finish things. Now, nobody's perfect. We don't manage to do everything we say. But if we find ourselves not being able to accomplish things that we want to or desire to more often than not, right? If the ratio is that we say something and we're not able to do it more than the ones that we're able to do and show up for, there's a possibility that this is part of the challenge. Pedaling back to this concept of what he's saying is, if you transfer this same concept into the self-mastery and self-care when we want to solve our problem, yes, it is very important to have somebody to share it with, right? But it's also important to know that the people that we're sharing our challenges with, they have to be people that also hold us accountable. We can't just be in a position where we just dump and dump and dump. Because if we are in that space where that is how it works, there is no kind of there's no encouragement to go actually change, right? So what Stephen King is saying really is that if you take that time to let whatever it is, you let that struggle kind of stay inside of you in a way where, obviously I'm not talking about an unhealthy way, but just take that time to be like, okay, I'm going to step into the highest version of myself and try to figure this out, right? Taking an hour or two away. Sometimes it's just taking a day off, even if it's impossible. If there is a challenge that keeps showing up, sometimes that's the case. That's something that has to be done. You take that time and you try to figure that out on your own. You sit down and you're like, what is going on here? What is the problem? What do I believe? What do I not believe? Who am I? Where did the tripwire happen? And more often than not, when we sit with ourselves, we do a little bit of breath work, a little bit of movement, we drink some water and hydrate, we get our nervous system back to where it's supposed to be. And we do some basic mundane stuff, right? I'm talking about simple stuff like washing the floor, the laundry. We go back into the basics. What ends up happening is we're not running outside of our environment, we're staying inside of our environment. What ends up happening is that as we do we domesticate ourselves, you will begin to see your intuition show up, and all of a sudden, in the middle of all of it, you will get this light bulb that will go off in your head, and you'll be like, oh my gosh, there it is. And that's exactly what happened to me that day. I ended up staying home, and I just went into the mundane, right? So I did some movement, and then I went into the mundane, and then I folded some laundry, I put up a soup, I washed the floor, I organized, and I kept it simple. And in the simplicity of things, where I just spent time with myself in my own environment, did I figure out where that component was, where that confidence was that gives me the ability to make the decisions I make daily. So as you move through your day, as you move through your week, just notice where in your day do you find yourself struggling with that next component of, like, I guess even taking your life into your own hands. And a lot of times it's because we have to show up in a certain way, or we're kind of stepping outside of our basic consistency, which is almost like we're outsourcing, right? So for a lot of us, when we don't have time and we're outsourcing, that can also happen. So take some time to just notice some of these components and see what shows up for you. So I hope that was helpful in this next piece. I'll open it up for questions if anyone has any, before we head out.